I shouldn't have let her stay the night. At least, that's what people would probably say if they knew the truth. A widowed woman. Her husband buried less than 24 hours earlier. And there she was, standing in my hallway in borrowed silence, holding a cup of tea with both hands, like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Even now, when I think about that night, I still hear the clock ticking on my living room wall. Slow. Heavy, like it knew something important had just started. Maybe it had. My name is James Carter. I'm 32 years old. I work as a corporate accountant. The kind of job where days blur together behind spreadsheets and quiet meetings. Nothing dramatic ever happens in my life, or at least it didn't until the knock on my door that afternoon, because when Eliza Matthews knocked, something changed. And the strange part, I think we both felt it before either of us spoke a word. But before I tell you how she ended up sleeping in my house that night, you need to understand who Eliza was. She lived right next door to me. Same street, same narrow stretch of quiet Denver suburb where nothing ever really happened. The houses looked almost identical. Small yards, white fences, even the mailboxes lined up like soldiers. We'd been neighbors for almost 3 years. But neighbors is all we were. Polite waves when we crossed paths. A quick hello if we happened to get the mail at the same time. That kind of thing. Eliza was 36. Calm green eyes. The kind of quiet beauty that didn't try to be noticed but somehow always was. Not flashy, not loud, just steady. She carried herself like someone who had learned how to be strong without needing anyone to see it. Her husband Mark was different. He was older, mid-40s maybe. Always in motion, always rushing somewhere. Phone pressed to his ear half the time. I don't think I ever had a real conversation with him. Just nods, quick greetings. Then he'd disappear into his car and drive off like he was already late. From the outside, they looked normal enough. But sometimes, when I'd see Eliza alone in her yard late in the evening, there was this quiet sadness about her. The kind people carry when they're used to being alone even when someone else lives in the same house. I noticed it. I just never said anything. Then last week, everything changed. Mark died. A sudden heart attack. One moment he was alive. The next moment the street was filled with flashing lights and neighbors whispering in small clusters pretending not to stare. Ambulance. Police cars. The kind of silence that settles over a neighborhood when something terrible happens. News travels fast in places like ours. By the next morning, everyone knew. By the end of the week, he was buried. I didn't go to the funeral. Not because I didn't care. It just didn't feel like my place. We weren't close. Showing up would have felt intrusive somehow. So that afternoon, I stayed home working remotely like usual. Sweatpants, hoodie, laptop open on the kitchen table. I was halfway through reviewing a spreadsheet when the knock came. 3 soft knocks. Not rushed, not loud, just careful. I remember thinking it was probably a delivery, but when I opened the door, it was her. Eliza stood on my porch wearing a long black coat, her hair pulled back loosely, her eyes red like she hadn't slept in days. In both hands she held a small ceramic cup, not drinking from it, just holding it, like it was something solid in a world that had suddenly turned weightless. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she gave a small, tired smile. "Hi, James." Her voice was soft, fragile, but steady enough that you could tell she had practiced holding herself together. "Hi," I said gently. She looked down at the cup in her hands for a moment, then back at me. "Do you mind if I come in for a minute?" There was something about the way she said it. Not desperate, not dramatic, just honest. Like she had already asked herself the question 100 times before knocking. "Of course," I said. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, glancing around my living room like she had never really seen it before. Which made sense. She hadn't. We were neighbors but strangers in every other way. I went to the kitchen and made fresh tea. Chamomile. The same kind she was holding. When I came back, she was sitting on the couch, with her hands wrapped around the cup, watching the steam rise from it. She looked smaller somehow, like grief had quietly taken up space around her. I sat in the chair across from her, and we didn't talk. Not for a while. The silence stretched out between us. But strangely, it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of quiet two people share when words would only make things heavier. Finally, she spoke. "It's too quiet next door." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. She stared into the tea. I thought I could handle it. A long breath left her chest. "But I don't want to be alone right now." I nodded. "You don't have to be." She gave a small, grateful smile. Then the words started coming slowly. Not all at once. Just small pieces of truth slipping out one by one. She told me about Mark. About how their marriage hadn't been terrible, but it hadn't really been alive either. How over the last few years they had slowly drifted apart without ever admitting it. How some nights they would sit in the same room and still feel miles away from each other. At one point, she looked up at me, almost embarrassed. "I know this sounds awful," she said quietly, "but part of me feels like I already grieved him before he died." She swallowed. "Like I lost him a long time ago and just didn't realize it yet. I didn't try to fix the moment, didn't try to give advice. I just listened. Sometimes that's the only thing someone really needs." Eventually, she finished her tea and stood up. At the door, she paused. Her eyes moved slowly around my living room. Then she looked back at me. "It's warm here," she said softly. "Not temperature. Something else." I understood what she meant. She gave a small nod. Then she left, back to the quiet house next door. That should have been the end of it. Just a neighbor helping another neighbor through a hard afternoon. But that night, something strange happened. The house felt different. Not empty, not exactly full either. Just aware, like the walls remembered she had been there. I went to bed, but sleep came slowly. My mind kept drifting back to the way she held that cup with both hands, like it was the only steady thing left in the world. The next morning I tried to focus on work again. Emails, numbers, budgets, normal life. But around noon, there was another knock. And somehow, before I even opened the door, I already knew it was Eliza. But this time, she wasn't just holding tea. She was holding 2 paper bags of lunch. And the look in her eyes told me something had changed overnight. The question was, had it changed for the better? Or were we about to step into something neither of us was ready for? When I opened the door, Eliza lifted the 2 brown paper bags slightly, like she needed proof that she had a reason to be there. "I figured you probably forgot to eat," she said. Her voice carried a small hint of a smile this time. Not a big one, just enough to show that something inside her had shifted since yesterday. I stepped back and let her in. She walked into the house like she had already memorized the path from the door to the kitchen. Her hoodie was oversized, gray and soft, the sleeves pulled over part of her hands. No makeup. Hair tied loosely like she hadn't bothered trying to make it perfect. And somehow that made her look more real, more human. She placed the bags on the kitchen counter and began pulling out sandwiches and small containers of soup. "I wasn't sure what you liked," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "so I just guessed." "Guessing works," I said. The deli down the street made decent food, nothing fancy. But when someone brings it to your house without asking, it feels different. Warmer. We carried the food out to the back patio. The sky above Denver was heavy with gray clouds, the kind that make the air feel thick and quiet. For a while we just ate. No conversation, no awkward explanations. Just the sound of paper wrappers and the occasional clink of a spoon against a bowl. Then Eliza leaned back in the patio chair and let out a long breath. "I thought I'd feel more devastated today," she said slowly. Her eyes drifted toward the fence separating our yards. "But instead, I just feel empty." Quote, the way she said it wasn't dramatic. It sounded more like someone describing the weather. "I keep waiting for something to hit me," she continued. "A wave of grief, anger, something." She looked down at her hands. "But it's just quiet." I nodded. Sometimes grief doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it just settles in the room and waits. She turned toward me again. Have you ever felt like you were disappearing in your own home? Quote, the question caught me off guard, but I understood what she meant. I thought about the nights I sat alone with the television playing just to fill the silence. I think a lot of people feel that way, I said. Her lips curved into a small, thoughtful smile. I used to sit at the dinner table waiting for Mark to come home, she said. Some nights he'd walk in, sit down across from me, and still feel 1,000 miles away. She picked up a napkin and folded it slowly. We weren't fighting, she added. That's the strange part. There was no big explosion. Just distance. She looked up at me. I didn't realize loneliness could grow that quietly. Quote, I didn't interrupt. She needed to say it out loud. After a moment, she shook her head and gave a soft laugh. Listen to me, she said. You barely know me, and I'm unloading my entire life story. That's okay, I said. Her eyes studied my face for a moment like she was checking if I meant it. Then she smiled again. A real one this time. All right, she said. Your turn. My turn? You can't let me do all the talking, she said. I thought about it for a second. Then I told her the story about the time I accidentally sent a company-wide email with a typo so bad it made an entire department think we were canceling a project. She laughed. Not politely, not quietly. A full laugh that caught her by surprise. She covered her mouth and shook her head. Oh no, she said. Please tell me someone noticed. Everyone noticed. Her laughter echoed across the backyard. For the first time since I had known her, she looked like someone who still had joy hiding somewhere inside her. Then, something small happened. Something so simple most people wouldn't even notice it. While we were clearing the wrappers from the table, our hands brushed. Just lightly. But neither of us pulled away right away. It lasted maybe 1 second. 2 at most. Long enough for both of us to feel it. Then she stepped back quickly. I should go, she said. Her voice had changed again. Not cold, just careful. This is probably too soon. I understood what she meant. Too soon to laugh. Too soon to sit here like the world was normal again. Maybe too soon to feel comfortable with someone new. You're not doing anything wrong, I said quietly. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you, she said. I walked her to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. Yesterday, she said, when I left, I thought the house next door would feel less heavy. She looked down at the floor, but it didn't. There was something fragile in the way she admitted that. Like saying it out loud made the loneliness more real. You don't have to sit there alone, I told her. Her eyes lifted to meet mine again. For a moment, it looked like she was going to say something else, something important. But instead, she just nodded. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her, and just like the night before, the house felt different again. Not empty, just aware. I tried to return to work. I really did. But my focus kept drifting to the window that faced her backyard. Around mid-afternoon, I finally gave up pretending to read emails. I walked over and looked outside. Eliza was standing on her back porch. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. Not crying, not moving, just standing there like someone who had reached the edge of something and didn't know which direction to step next. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I told myself to stop watching. This wasn't my business. She had her own life, her own grief, her own house. But something about the way she stood there made it impossible to ignore. Finally, she turned and walked back inside. I exhaled slowly. Maybe that was good. Maybe she was starting to face the quiet on her own. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. It had barely cooled when the knock came. 3 soft knocks, exactly the same as yesterday. I didn't even check the window this time, I already knew. When I opened the door, Eliza stood there again. But this time, there was something different about her. She wore a navy sweater that slipped slightly off one shoulder and black leggings. Her hair was loose around her face. No makeup, no jewelry, just her. But the look in her eyes was heavier, like she had spent the last hour arguing with herself. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside. Of course. She walked inside slowly, Not toward the couch this time. She stopped in the middle of the living room, like she wasn't sure she deserved to be there. "I wasn't planning to come over," she said. "I went back and forth for almost an hour." Her fingers twisted together nervously. "I just didn't know where else to go." I could hear the honesty in her voice. No drama, no exaggeration, just someone reaching the limit of what they could handle alone. "You don't need a reason to be here," I told her. Her shoulders dropped slightly, like she had been holding tension there all day. She walked to the couch and curled into the corner with her knees pulled up. I sat across from her. The old wall clock ticked quietly behind us. Then she said something that made the room feel even heavier. "I don't know how to be alone." She stared at the floor. "I went from living with my parents straight to living with Mark." Her voice softened. "I've never actually lived by myself." I nodded slowly. "That kind of change is hard." She let out a long breath. "The strange part is," she said, "I felt alone even when he was alive." Then she lifted her eyes to meet mine, and the question she asked next hung in the air between us. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel guilty being here?" I didn't answer her question right away, not because I didn't know what to say, because I wanted to say it carefully. Eliza sat curled into the corner of my couch, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes stayed fixed on me like my answer might decide something important. The clock ticked slowly behind us. Finally, I spoke. "I don't think connection is something you're supposed to refuse," I said. Her brow tightened slightly. "Even if it shows up early?" "Especially then," I said. The tension in her shoulders loosened just a little. She exhaled like she had been holding that breath all afternoon. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked toward the hallway that led to the front door, like she was imagining the walk back to her house. "I don't want to go back there tonight." Her voice was quiet, but steady. I waited, not pushing. She continued. "It's not that I'm running away," she said. "I know I have to face it eventually." Her fingers tightened around the sleeves of her sweater. "But every room in that house feels like it's pressing in on me." She looked up again. "I keep expecting to hear his keys in the door." A pause. And when it doesn't happen, the silence gets louder. I understood what she meant. Grief isn't always crying. Sometimes it's the sound of nothing. The kind that makes your chest feel tight. She swallowed slowly. "I feel like if I sit there alone tonight," she said. Her voice cracked slightly. "I might suffocate." There was no drama in the words, just truth. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on my knees. "You don't have to go back tonight," I said. Her eyes flickered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you can stay here." The words came out simple, like the decision had already been made somewhere inside me. "I have a guest room," I added. "You can take it." For a moment, she didn't react. She just stared at me, like she wasn't sure she heard correctly. "You'd really do that?" she asked. "Of course." She blinked slowly. "I didn't expect you to say yes." "Why not?" Her mouth curved into a small, sad smile. "Because most people would think it's strange." She wasn't wrong if someone told me the story from the outside. Widowed neighbor, one day after the funeral. Staying the night in the house next door. Yeah, people would talk, but none of that mattered right now. "You're not asking for something wrong," I said. "You're asking not to be alone." Quote. The room grew quiet again. Eliza wiped the corner of one eye quickly, like she didn't want me to notice, but I did. "Thank you," she whispered. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet. The guest room was small, just a bed, a dresser, and a lamp by the window, but it was clean. I grabbed a set of fresh sheets and a blanket. When I returned to the living room, she was still sitting in the same spot, watching me carefully. "You don't have to worry," I said gently. "You'll have your own room, total privacy." She nodded. "I know." There was trust in the way she said it. That mattered more than anything. I walked down the hall and began making the bed. The quiet movements filled the house. Sheet corners tucked in, pillow fluffed, blanket folded neatly at the end. It felt strangely normal, like preparing a place for someone who had always belonged there. When I stepped back into the living room, she had moved to the kitchen. She stood by the counter pouring water into 2 glasses. "You always keep your house this tidy?" she asked. "Only when someone might judge me." Quote. She laughed softly. The sound felt lighter tonight. She handed me one of the glasses. "Thank you again," she said. "You don't have to thank me twice." "I know." But the gratitude in her eyes stayed. Later that evening, we sat on opposite ends of the couch. A quiet nature show played on the television. Mountains, rivers, a narrator explaining the migration of birds. Neither of us paid much attention to it. It was just background noise, something to keep the silence from becoming too heavy. Every once in a while we talked. Small things, favorite coffee shops, movies we liked, places we'd always meant to visit but never did. At one point she pulled the gray blanket from the back of the couch and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You keep this house really calm," she said. "Is that a good thing?" "It is tonight." Her voice softened. After a while the clock crept toward midnight. She looked at the hallway. "I should probably try to sleep." I stood. "I'll show you the room." She followed me quietly. When we reached the guest room door, I stepped aside. "Here you go." Quote. She walked inside slowly. The lamp cast a warm light across the bed. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the small space. "It's perfect," she said. Then she looked back at me. "I really didn't think anyone would let me do this." "Most people would," I said. "I'm not sure about that." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "James?" "Yeah?" "For not asking 1,000 questions. For not making this weird. For just letting me breathe." She wrapped her arms around me. The hug was sudden, but gentle. Her head rested against my shoulder. I froze for half a second, then slowly returned the hug. Not tight, not lingering, just steady. Like holding someone who needed to feel the ground beneath their feet again. It didn't feel romantic. It felt human. After a moment, she pulled back. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night, Eliza." I closed the door halfway so she would have privacy. Then I walked back to the living room. The house was quiet again, but different, not empty, not tense, just full of a new awareness. Down the hall, someone was sleeping in my guest room. A woman who had buried her husband yesterday. A woman who trusted me enough to knock on my door when silence became too heavy. I turned off the lights and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily, not because anything had happened. Nothing had. But I could feel the weight of the moment. 2 lives crossing in a way neither of us had planned. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up briefly. The house was completely still. No footsteps, no voices, just the quiet breathing of the night. And one strange thought settled into my mind before I drifted back to sleep. Letting her stay here tonight might be the kindest thing I could do. Or it might be the moment everything between us quietly changed forever. Morning came quietly. The kind of soft morning where light slips through the windows before you're fully awake. I was already in the kitchen when I heard her footsteps. Slow, careful, like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to still be here. I poured coffee into 2 mugs without looking toward the hallway. A second later, she appeared. Eliza stood there wrapped in the gray blanket from the couch. Her hair was messy, falling loosely around her face. No makeup, no jewelry, just tired eyes and a quiet kind of honesty. "Morning," she said. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. "Morning," I replied. I slid the second mug across the counter. "I wasn't sure how you take it." She looked down at the cup. "However you made it is fine." She wrapped both hands around it like she had the day she first came over. That same small anchor. We stood there in the kitchen sipping coffee in silence. But it wasn't awkward, just calm. After a moment she spoke. "I slept better than I expected." "That's good." She nodded slowly. "Your house feels peaceful." She looked toward the living room. "Mine still feels like it's holding its breath." The words hung there. Grief doesn't disappear overnight. But something had shifted. She took another sip of coffee and studied me carefully. I have no idea what I'm doing, she admitted. I leaned back against the counter. I don't think you're supposed to. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. What do you mean? I think right now the goal is just getting through the next minute. A faint smile touched her lips. That sounds manageable. We stayed there a little longer. Morning light slowly filled the kitchen. The air felt lighter than yesterday. Not healed, just softer. Eventually, she folded the blanket neatly and placed it over the back of a chair. I should probably go home, she said. The words came out slowly, like she wasn't sure she meant them. You don't have to rush. I know. She hesitated. Then she walked to the front door. Her hand rested on the handle for a moment. You didn't make this weird, she said. I smiled. That was the goal. She laughed softly. Then she stepped outside. For a few seconds I stood there watching through the window as she walked across the yard toward her house. The morning sun caught the edge of her hair. She paused at her own front door, then went inside. The door closed, and suddenly my house felt quieter again. Not empty, just aware. Like it knew something had started and wasn't sure where it would lead. The day moved slowly. Emails, work calls, spreadsheets. But my mind kept drifting toward the window that faced her backyard. Around noon, I finally stood up and stretched. That's when I saw her again. Eliza was outside on her porch. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting there with a small notebook in her lap, writing something. The sight surprised me. Yesterday, she had looked like someone barely holding herself together. Today, there was a little steadiness. Maybe facing the house had helped. Maybe sleeping somewhere safe had given her the strength to try. I went back to work. A couple hours passed. Then the knock came again. 3 soft knocks. I smiled before I even reached the door. When I opened it, Eliza stood there holding a small grocery bag. Please tell me you haven't eaten lunch yet, she said. I was about to. Good, she said, because I brought ingredients. She walked past me like it was the most natural thing in the world. What are we making? I asked. Pasta. That sounds suspiciously confident. She laughed. I promise I won't poison you. The kitchen filled with the quiet rhythm of cooking, water boiling, vegetables chopping, the smell of garlic in the pan. At one point, she nudged my shoulder gently. You're cutting those tomatoes like you're afraid of them. I respect tomatoes. She rolled her eyes. Move over. We bumped into each other a few times in the small kitchen, nothing dramatic, just small accidental touches, each one followed by a quiet pause, like both of us noticed. But neither of us said anything. We carried our plates to the dining table. For a while we ate and talked about simple things again. Books, music, bad movies we secretly liked. Then the conversation slowed. She twirled pasta around her fork thoughtfully. Last night helped, she said. I'm glad. I think I needed a place where nothing felt heavy. She looked at me. You gave me that. Her voice softened. After dinner, we moved to the couch. A nature documentary played quietly on the television again. Eliza tucked her legs beneath her and leaned back. I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. The room was dim except for the soft glow of the screen. Minutes passed. Neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, she leaned her head against my shoulder. My body went still. Not because I was uncomfortable, because I wanted to make sure the moment stayed gentle. Careful. My arm moved around her without thinking. Light. Protective. She didn't pull away. We stayed like that for a long time. The documentary ended. Another one started. The room grew even quieter. Eventually, she lifted her head slightly and looked at me. Our faces were closer than they had ever been. I could feel the warmth of her breath. There was a question in her eyes. Not spoken, but clear. She hesitated, then leaned forward. The kiss was soft, brief, careful. More like a shared moment of understanding than anything else. And the second it ended, she pulled back quickly. Her eyes widened slightly. I'm sorry. The words came out almost immediately. I shook my head. You don't have to apologize. Her cheeks flushed faintly. I didn't plan that. I know. Quote, silence settled between us again, but it wasn't tense, just thoughtful. She leaned back slowly and rested against my chest. Neither of us spoke. No rush. No pressure. Just two people sitting quietly in a moment neither of us expected. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet thought surfaced. This was the kind of moment that could bring two people closer, or make everything suddenly complicated. And I wasn't sure yet which direction we were heading. The morning after that kiss, nothing dramatic happened. No awkward speech, no rushed explanation, no pretending it didn't happen either. Eliza woke up early, earlier than I did. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, standing by the window with a mug of coffee and her hair tied loosely back. Sunlight was spilling across the counter. She looked over her shoulder when she heard my footsteps. "Morning," she said. Her voice sounded normal, calm, but there was a small awareness between us now. Something new sitting quietly in the room. "Morning," I replied. I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter. For a few seconds we just stood there. Then she spoke first. "I'm going back to my house today." The words came out steady, not sad, just honest. I nodded. "That makes sense." She watched my face carefully. "You're not upset?" "No," I said. "You said you needed to face it eventually." She smiled slightly. "I did." There was a pause. Then she added softly, "But I'm glad I didn't face it alone the first time." That sentence settled somewhere deep in my chest. We finished our coffee quietly. Then she folded the gray blanket she had used again and placed it neatly on the back of the couch. Small gestures. Order returning. At the door, she hesitated. "James?" "Yeah?" "That kiss." Her voice faded for a moment. "I don't want it to feel like I'm replacing anything." "I know. And I don't want you to feel like you're some kind of escape." "I know that too." Relief softened her expression. "Good." She opened the door. The morning air drifted inside. For a second, she looked back at me. "Thank you for being patient." "Take your time," I said. She nodded, then walked back across the yard to her house. This time, I didn't watch from the window. She needed that step to belong to her. The next few days were quieter. Eliza didn't come over every morning. She stayed in her own house, sorting through things, facing the rooms she had avoided. But every afternoon she would stop by, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to sit on the porch. One evening she showed up holding a cardboard box. "Donation pile," she said. Inside were clothes, old books, a few decorations. "Mark had a lot of things he never used," she explained. "Feels strange going through it all." "Strange how?" She thought about that. "Like I'm organizing someone else's life." We carried the box to my car and drove it to the donation center together. On the way back, we stopped for ice cream. It was a small, ordinary moment. But I could see something changing in her. Her eyes looked clearer. Still sad sometimes. Still thoughtful. But lighter. One night, we took a walk through the neighborhood. The air was cool, and the streetlights had just started flickering on. We walked side by side along the sidewalk, not holding hands, just close. After a while, she spoke. "You know what surprised me the most this week?" "What?" "That grief doesn't come in one shape." She looked up at the sky. "Some days it's heavy. Some days it's quiet. And some days—" She glanced at me. "It sits beside hope." I liked that sentence. It felt true. A few weeks passed like that. Slow. Natural. No rushing. Sometimes she came over for dinner. Sometimes I went to her place. Her house was starting to look different. Windows open. Fresh paint in the hallway. A few empty shelves where old things used to sit. One afternoon, she showed me a small wooden box she had found while cleaning. Inside were old photographs, most of them from early in her marriage. She studied one picture quietly. "Back then, we were happy," she said. "People change," I said gently. She nodded. "We did." Then she placed the photo back in the box, not angrily, not sadly, just respectfully, like closing a chapter that had already ended. About a month after the night she stayed in my house, she invited me over for dinner. It was the first time I stepped inside her home since everything had happened. I felt strangely nervous walking up to the door, but when she opened it, the air inside felt different, lighter. The living room had new curtains. The windows were open. Music played softly in the background. "You redecorated," I said. "A little." She smiled. "Turns out fresh paint can do a lot for a room." We ate pasta on her back patio as the sun slowly set. The sky turned orange and gold above the fence line. For a while, we talked about small things again. Work, travel, books. Then she grew quiet. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said. "About what?" "About what comes next." I leaned back in my chair. "That's a big question." She nodded. "It is." Her fingers moved slowly across the table until they touched mine. She didn't rush, just rested her hand there, warm, steady. "I'm not trying to forget anything," she said softly. "I know. I just don't want my life to stay paused forever." Quote. Our fingers intertwined naturally, like they had been waiting to do that. She looked at me with calm certainty. "When I picture the future," she said, "you're in it." My chest tightened slightly, not with pressure, with quiet understanding. "We'll take it slow," I told her. Her smile was real this time. Bright, in a way I hadn't seen before. "I'd like that." As the evening air cooled around us, I realized something. None of this had happened quickly. There had been no dramatic turning point, just small choices. Kindness. Patience. Two people slowly deciding to stay. And for the first time since the knock on my door, I felt certain of something. This wasn't about replacing the past. It was about building something new beside it. But even then, I didn't realize how deeply our lives would grow together in the year that followed. A year can pass quietly if you're not paying attention. Not in one dramatic moment. Not with fireworks or big declarations. Just small days stacking on top of each other until one afternoon you look around and realize life feels different. That's how it happened with Eliza and me. There was no sudden moment where we announced we were together. No grand decision. We just kept showing up. Coffee in the mornings. Walks after dinner. Movies where neither of us paid attention to the ending because we were too busy talking. Slowly, the space between our houses stopped feeling like distance. It felt like a path. Eliza was still grieving. Grief doesn't disappear because love shows up. Some evenings she would sit quietly on the couch, staring out the window with that faraway look. When that happened, I didn't try to distract her. I just sat beside her. Sometimes she would talk about Mark. About the early years when things were good. About the long, quiet stretch when they stopped knowing how to reach each other. Those conversations were never uncomfortable. Because this was never about erasing someone from her story. It was about letting the past exist, without letting it trap the future. One afternoon in early spring, we were painting her spare bedroom. She had decided to turn it into a small reading room. Sunlight poured through the open windows. Music played softly from her phone. At one point, she stepped back and looked at the freshly painted walls. "Do you know something strange?" she said. "What?" "This house used to feel like it was holding its breath." She ran her fingers across the windowsill. "Now it feels like it's exhaling." I smiled. "That's a good sign." She nodded, then flicked a small drop of paint at my shirt. I stared down at the spot. "You just started a paint war," I said. Her eyes widened. "Oh, no." But it was already too late. A minute later, we were both laughing like kids, paint smudged on our hands and shirts. The room echoed with the kind of joy that only shows up when people feel safe. That night we ordered pizza and sat on the floor, eating from the box. No fancy dinner, just quiet happiness. Another few months passed. Summer arrived. One warm evening we sat on my porch watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned soft shades of orange and pink. Eliza leaned against me, her head resting comfortably on my shoulder. Her fingers were laced through mine the way they often were now, like it had always been that simple. She was quiet for a while. Then she spoke. "You know what I used to believe?" "What?" "That my life had already happened." I turned slightly to look at her. "What do you mean?" She shrugged gently. "I thought everything important was already behind me." She watched the sunset carefully. "Marriage. A house. A routine." She paused. "When Mark died, I thought that was the end of the story." Her hand squeezed mine softly. "But now I think something else." "What's that?" She turned her face toward me. Her green eyes reflected the fading light. "I think my life was just waiting." The words landed softly between us, not dramatic, just true. I brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face and kissed her forehead. "Sometimes timing is strange," I said. She smiled. "Strange, in a good way." Another quiet moment passed. The porch creaked gently beneath our chairs. Cicadas hummed in the distance. Then she looked up at me again. "Do you remember the first day I knocked on your door?" "Of course." "I almost didn't do it." "Really?" She nodded. "I stood on my porch for 15 minutes arguing with myself." "What changed your mind?" She thought about that. Then she said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. The silence next door became heavier than the fear of knocking. I understood that. Sometimes courage doesn't look like bravery. Sometimes it just looks like choosing not to be alone. A few weeks later, she brought something over to my house. It was the ceramic teacup she had held the first day she came to my door. The same one she clung to like it was an anchor. She placed it gently on my kitchen counter. "I think this belongs here now," she said. "Why?" She smiled softly, because that was the day everything started changing. I picked up the cup. It was simple. White ceramic, nothing special. But somehow, it felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 quiet moments. I placed it on the shelf above the sink, right where we could both see it every morning. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. Real life never does. There were still difficult days, still memories that caught her off guard, still moments when grief showed up uninvited. But those moments didn't control the whole story anymore. Because now there was something else living beside them. Hope. One evening nearly a year after the day she first knocked on my door, we sat together on the same couch where she had once asked if it was wrong to be there. She leaned into me comfortably, her hand resting in mine. The room felt warm, full, peaceful. "James," she said quietly. "Yeah? I'm really glad I knocked." I squeezed her hand gently. "So am I." We sat there listening to the quiet of the house. But it wasn't the heavy silence she had been afraid of that first day. This one felt different, full of life, full of promise. And as I looked at her, resting beside me, I realized something simple, but powerful. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, right after a door closes, knocks softly, and asks if it can come in. And if you open that door, it might change everything, because some endings aren't really endings at all. Sometimes they're just the moment life takes a breath before it begins again.